Hello, welcome to the Optimistic American podcast. I'm your host today, Dr. Emily Bashah, and I'm with my guest, Paul Johnson. Today, we are going to talk about how to improve the quality of your life in your workplace and help you get your needs met, as well as fostering agency and power. Some of the common questions that I hear employees asking are, when do I ask for a raise? How do I get promoted? How do I change my workplace culture or influence it so that I could be more satisfied and happy there? These are really important questions that we're going to be addressing with my guest, Paul Johnson. Welcome, Paul. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, it's nice
on
to
my own
switch
show
it
or our
around.
own show.
It's nice to switch around the roles.
I just don't like the idea that you're in my big chair. This has always been me in the big chair asking the psychologist questions, but it'll be fun today.
It's nice to learn from each other
There
in
we
order
go.
to do this.
Definitely.
So this actually is a perfect segue into the first question is how do we help us understand employer and employee relations? You have a lot of experience being the former mayor of Phoenix. You had 17 or 14,000 employees. And then you also had many different businesses and still currently are the founding CEO of Redirect Health. And there's, a lot to learn from being an employer of such big companies and businesses. So help us understand.
Well, start with this. There's a big difference between what I'll call a public employer and a private employer. Now, a public employer, certainly the city of Phoenix, where we had 14,000 employees, is a public employer. But public companies can be the same thing, or companies that have been funded with what I call opium, or what many people call opium, which is other people's money, right? Once you get that shot of opium, you have to keep having more of it. There's a difference between them and the entrepreneur who's doing his own startup and putting something together, which sometimes can be thousands of employees. I've had two different businesses, one with about 1,500 employees and the current one with about 400 employees. But they're companies that my partners and I put together. Now, I should also say that I need to point out in my own, the company that I'm involved with today, Redirect Health, I have two partners, Dr. Janice Johnston and Dr. David Berg. Both of them really spend more time on the employee issues than I do. They're exceptional at it. They're really good at leading people and helping make them work. And there are a lot of things that I will say today that I've actually learned from them in the process. But the difference between a city or a public company and a private company is this. In a private company, entrepreneurship, they demand efficiency and leadership. But when you get to a public company like the city of Phoenix, the primary issue really isn't efficiency or leadership. It doesn't mean they don't need them. They certainly do. But their issue is fairness. Think about it this way. If you're in a private company and they decide, hey, we need to go build a building, so we're going to go interview a couple of contractors, and then we're going to hire one, and then we're going to make a decision about what it is that we need to build, that's absolutely an okay thing to do. But in a city especially, and for that matter for companies that have gone public, being fair actually matters more than the efficiency. If you go hire a contractor in the city and you just go interview 3 contractors, you're going to have lawsuits. You're going to have problems. You have to put that out to every single contractor in the city to be able to bid. And then they submit those proposals, and then you have to walk through those proposals to see which one is the right one. It is not an efficient process at all, but it's a fair process. And because we're dealing with taxpayers' dollars in that case, or in the case of a public company, with dollars that are coming in from small investors all around the country, it's more important that you follow a set of rules. I'm going to address most of my questions today to the questions that relate to private employers, because to me there's there's a big difference, and I think that that's going to be important. Now, the first issue that I'd like to talk about with employees is the need for confidence. When you think about confidence, I think all employees need to have both leadership and agency. Both of those end up being important. We'll talk about those in a moment. But confidence comes from this place of the messages that we give to ourselves. And what I see with a lot of employees is that the messages that they're giving to themselves right up front are problematic. They're messages of, I'm not good enough, or I'm not smart enough, or the other person has a degree and I don't have a degree. So those messages that they give to themselves actually end up causing more problems than the lack of whatever it is that they think they don't have. The degree really is usually important to get your foot through the door. But after you get your foot through the door and you're working, that becomes much less important. People just don't pay as much of attention to it. Then it becomes an issue of being able to execute.
You know, as you were talking about this, I was thinking about this issue I had this morning. I was so frustrated. I was at my doctor's office for my daughter, a pediatrician's office. First thing I do, I walk in, and it's a well visit. She's not sick. We're just checking in on her. She's 2 years old. The person that greets me doesn't even look at me in the eyes. I'm treated as a complete inconvenience to her day. And everything thereafter, I was just kind of pushed through an assembly line, but then made to wait for an hour and 45 minutes. All the while, I'm constantly asking, like, you know, are we going to be seen? They put me into the waiting room. And this isn't an uncommon experience. It wasn't unusual. And when I see my pediatrician, I absolutely love her. I tell her I will follow her wherever she goes, but I don't love her system. I don't love where she's working. And I was encouraging her, in fact, to open her own private practice.
Yeah,
so frustrating.
So let me tell you that that healthcare is besieged with those problems. And here's partly why.
So frustrating.
And by the way, we have a lot of providers that work for us. I know some of them will be upset that I say this, but I genuinely love people who go into healthcare. They want to make the world better. They want to improve people. However, they spend a lot of time getting that degree, And so oftentimes they get to this point of thinking, I earned this. Well, that's not the way business works. Business works with a customer who says, it's supposed to be about me. If you go to a doctor's office and you see that the primary spots that a doctor's using are the ones right up front, that's the first indication you have a problem. If you wait 2 hours in a lobby, that's the second indication that you have a problem. Now, it may be a great doctor. They may give great results. And oftentimes doctors focus on that. But what they don't get is the patient doesn't understand that. The customer doesn't understand that. They don't know what a great product delivery generally is. What they do know is that you didn't see me as being important enough that you wouldn't leave me in the lobby for 2 hours. Now, the thing I want to get back to is the employees.
Yes.
And I'm going to ask you a question. On the employees, the messages that people send to themselves, their core values, what are they
Core
called?
beliefs.
Core beliefs, right? How do those oftentimes get in the way of people being successful? Certainly, you know, I'm interested in how they become successful as an employee, but how do they get in the way, and what can you do to try to change them?
Yeah, I see that in my clinical practice because I see working professionals in all kinds of different settings. And what I see is sometimes they'll self-sabotage or really poor conflict resolution skills. They may be looking at a problem incorrectly, and then they would just want to prove that they're right, and they have this assumption that everybody else is wrong. And they don't actually try to learn about the problem or have that openness and that ego tolerance in order to come into the problem without being defensive. Once somebody's defensive, and I see this all the time, I mean, even in the forensic work that I do, it's like their brain just shuts down hearing what alternative options or alternative explanations could be. And it's good to practice because it does flood over or spill over into our relationships and into other situations or instances that are affecting our lives and the quality of our lives and the quality of our relationships. Because if we're likely occupied by that faulty thinking in our workplace, it's likely spilling over into our personal lives as well. So the core beliefs essentially really come down to very common things. Either somebody believes that they're unlovable, or they believe that they're inadequate or incompetent, or that they're a failure and never going to succeed. So sometimes I'll see them self-sabotage because they may not especially if somebody has a core belief I'm a failure or inadequate, they'll not actually put in their 100% effort. And you'll see that they won't actually inherently try, so that when they do fail, because ultimately they will, because that's what they're doing, they can blame it on external circumstances rather than seeing that, well, I put in 100% effort and I failed, so that must inherently mean that there's something faulty or wrong with me. But if I only put in 50% or 30%, and I spend a lot of my time gaming, or I don't spend enough time reading up on this, or getting some advanced education to help me with that promotion, or doing all these other things, staying late in my job, or excelling in other areas, I could just blame it on everything else that's external. So that's problematic. And sometimes it's really hard to see whether, because those habits are so entrenched, it can sometimes be very, very hard to break those, especially when people are very ego sensitive and not willing to take responsibility or accountability for themselves. So practicing openness, hearing alternative perspectives, thinking about the situation more expansively rather than limiting or constricting your perceptual horizon is going to help you be able to see different ways of improving. You have to take risks and take chances, see them as challenges, but you have to be able to have that willingness to engage in things that aren't going to be as comfortable, aren't going to be as familiar, so that you can learn and you can grow.
I find over and again with employees that the single biggest challenge that an employee will have are the limits they set on themselves. Mm-hmm. It's this belief that I can't do this, I can't make this happen, and then they'll have this message or this core belief that stops them. The most important thing is that you have to think about this issue of leadership and agency. Now, leadership is really about the ability to influence people, but you can't influence people until you learn to influence yourself. Influencing yourself is the starting point. Agency is, we talk a lot about agency. In fact, I would tell you most of what we've done in our podcast together have been about trying to give people self-agency. If there was one thing I could change in our country, it would be helping Americans restore their sense of agency. I think that's a problem politically. I think that it's a problem inside of our government. It's people setting limits for themselves, and they partly limit themselves by not being willing to listen to alternative points of view and being able to be resilient, to being able to deal with things that maybe are more confrontational. But agency is the belief that you can determine your own fate, that through your actions, the things that you do will actually determine the outcomes. Most people don't believe that, but if there's anything that I found to be true, it's that our actions do influence our fate and what's going to happen to us eventually. Okay, Emily, now I'm going to ask you a question. And the question is, on agency, do we actually have control over our own destiny?
That's a fascinating question. Before we get to that, I think there were a couple things that you had just spoke about that prompted some examples from my own experience of being an employee. One was when I was working in a really large system in community mental health, and I was really frustrated with the system and how they were treating different clients and members who were coming. But I loved the population I was working with. And I loved the challenges that I was presented with. And I even considered staying on for such minimal pay because I really loved the work. But I knew I would have been burnt out from working within that system. And so I want to commend you, Paul, because you really believed in me and encouraged me and supported me to venture out on my own and open up my own private practice. And I have to say, for people who are considering opening up their own business and being an entrepreneur themselves, or maybe taking some other risks or rising up to the challenge to grow in whatever it is that they're doing, having support and somebody who you trust and confide in, believe in you and support you and mentor you is so vital. And it was so important to me because I didn't believe in myself. I didn't know what I was going to confront. I didn't know what challenges I was going to face. It was all the unknown. And I was bogged down with a $200,000 student debt and looking at probably making about $35,000 a year, if that, as a starting salary. And it was a huge risk to then say, well, I'm going to absorb that loss, and I might even go into more debt by trying to venture into this unknown territory.
So the single biggest issue that we face is the paralysis of fear.
Yeah, and part of that is my own core belief that we were talking about before. But I have to say, I needed that group of people who believed in me and said, no matter what, even if you fall to your feet, we're going to be your safety net, and we're going to be there for you, and we're going to help you get through this. And we may not have all the information, but we're going to support you in whatever way, shape, or form that means. And I had my family believing in me. I had my core friends believing in me. I was in a business mentoring group of people who believed in me. And I have to say, all of that gave me the strength and the courage to take
so
those
dealing with
first
fear,
steps.
finding a support structure, I get that. But how much of this is dependent upon you and your mental state and how you see things? Do you actually have the ability to overcome environment?
Yes, absolutely. I think there's so much that we can do to influence our external worlds and our environment, but we have to be honest with ourselves. When I see people getting stuck, they're having built up resentment, and they just want to blame all kinds of different people. Blame the system, blame their spouse, blame their employer, blame their coworkers, but they're not actually taking steps to resolve and make change to what's happening. I have another example that came to mind. I was in a job as a caregiver, really attending physically to the needs of an older person who had a very severe physical and mental, emotional disabilities. And it was taxing on me emotionally, more so than physically, even though it was a lot of lifting and shifting. And I realized I began to resent that position, and it bled over into me resenting the client. And I had to realize I'm not equipped for this job. I think I tolerated it for about a year, but it got to the point that I was showing up late. I was resenting going to work on my way there. I purposely didn't want to be there, and I was like sabotaging getting there on time. Like everything inside of me did not want to be there. And it took me a year to realize that this isn't the right position for me, and I'm not serving this person, and I had to leave.
Yeah, I think there's no doubt sometimes we have to take a look at whether or not we're in the right mental state, whether or not the mental state that we're in works. But I believe you can change your mental state, that you do have some ability to determine your own destiny. And to me, that's a big question that needs to be answered. I think many people don't. Many people believe that environment trumps psychology. I think that if you have the right psychology, you can change the environment. What's your thoughts on that?
You know, Viktor Frankel has a wonderful quote, and he says, if you cannot change the circumstances that you are in, you are forced to change yourself. And I think that is so true. So, you know, I just gave two examples. One in which I decided to leave a job that I just wasn't happy in, and I was growing resentful. So I'm able to change my environment by putting myself in a different environment. That's one way to do it. But Viktor Frankl was in a concentration camp as a prisoner. There was no way he was going to be leaving. It's not like he could just, unless he wanted to commit suicide or do something else, but he had meaning. And his meaning was, I've got to write my book on logotherapy and about man's search for meaning. Because this is incredible and this is so important. He was somebody who, a psychiatrist, and he worked with people who had survived attempts of suicide or who were suicidal. And he helped them to hold on to meaning of life. And I can't think of more noble work than that in which he committed his life to. And here is a man surviving, I mean, insufferable circumstances and situations. If you're not going to die of malnourishment or extreme weather conditions and horrific forms of abuse and deprivation, he did. And he said what it comes down to is that will to survive matters. Once you give up on life, and this is what he was witnessing even in the concentration camp of other prisoners, once they had nothing else to live for and no hope, that they died because there was something about that will power to live that kept him going and kept others going if they had it, that he had observed. And sure enough, his whole family perished in concentration camps. Everyone died, and he had no knowledge or information, and he would watch the sunset and think about his wife and praying that, you know, she would never be under similar circumstances or situation that he was in, nor would she know about that he was enduring, because knowing that would make her suffer. But sure enough, he survived the circumstance, and years later, he published the books, and he helped immense, communities that were really suffering.
Yeah, I've first, if any guest wants to listen to him, there's lots of different video on him before he passed away. What I like about Victor, one of my favorite stories was the one that he told about sunsets. That for the most part, they were just assigned to very hard labor, and their life was grueling. It was demeaning. They were beaten. They were tortured. They weren't fed enough. They were starving to death. But he convinced people to go focus on the sunset every night. And he said that, to do that, you're going to have to be out working. You're going to have to be out in the field. But when that sunset goes down, keep working, but watch it. Watch it the entire way as it drops underneath the horizon. And then he said at night, when they'd go into their bunks, they'd talk about it and how beautiful it was. Victor said that there are 3 ways that you can gain a sense of meaning. The first one is what or who you love, right? When everyone he loved was gone, he learned to love a sunset, right? That was important. What you create, your art, your music, your company, what you're doing inside your business or working for your employer, what you create gives you a sense of meaning. And then his third one was struggle, that when life gets so bad, when the struggle becomes so hard, your ability to survive that in itself becomes a sense of meaning. Now, we add a fourth one, which is service. What you give back to other people can matter as well. But the whole idea is that you have the free will to decide how you're going to see a situation. He decided that he was going to make surviving the framework that he was going to look at this exercise through, that he was going to look at it as a way to try to understand mankind better so that he could give lessons into the future. And he also decided trying to save and help other people was going to become part of his mission. Our first goal in finding meaning, to me, our goal towards that is we have to try to make ourselves a better person. We need to focus on those skill sets that focus on leadership. And leadership is in big part about execution.
Yeah, and even if your future is unforeseeable and you're unsure about your fate, as Viktor Frankl was confronted, living a day-to-day existence, not knowing if you were going to be killed tomorrow or die by an untreated illness or malnutrition, all of those things are highly, highly possible, that you have to have the courage and the stamina and the perseverance to keep going. And there was another really very powerful story that I remember Viktor Frankl wrote about or talked about, was that there was another prisoner in the camp who had a dream that the camp was going to be liberated on a specific date. So that prisoner kept counting down the days, thinking, okay, it's coming, it's coming. We are going to be liberated on this day. And sure enough, that day came and went, and there was no change in the circumstances in the concentration camp. It was the very next day that prisoner died. And in a way, Viktor Frankl told himself, he likely died because he lost that hope and he lost that perseverance and that stamina and that free will, realizing that I'm just inextricably stuck in this situation that there's nothing that I can do to change it. But yet you can see he survived as many days as he had just based on that belief and hope that there was a possibility. And so that shows you the power that we have to affect change within ourselves, and it can change our physiology. Viktor Frankl very beautifully put, my friend, in a beautiful way, you were liberated, meaning he was free from physical suffering when he passed. And that just shows you another example of how Viktor Frankl transforms the way that he's viewing situations. And these are things that we have in our power to control and change. We talked about some of our emotional states, and I said some people, feel resentful, or they have that anger inside of them, or they feel frustrated, or they're aggressive and they're angry all the time. I mean, these are things that are emotional states that are likely tied to what are you telling yourself that is keeping you stuck in that pattern. And what is it that you can do to effect that change? Can you change your situation? What are the options that you see for yourself? Possibly you're constraining those options. And so that's where it can be helpful to talk with somebody else to be able to expand that. But the real trick is, how do you change how you're thinking about this situation in order to influence how you're feeling about it? So Paul, I was so grateful when you and your partner, Dave Berg, also came in and said, hey, Emily, we think that you should go into your own business, open your own private practice. We support you. We'll send you referrals. We'll give you a discount on the rent, all of these things that help me to just stand on my own 2 feet without feeling like I'm in quicksand. And just with that immense gratitude. But I have to ask the question, do you just believe in anyone and everyone? Do we all possess the capacity for leadership? Or are there certain people that really have these leadership traits and characteristics?
Well, I'm going to come back to, you have to ask the question, what do I want? Mm-hmm. What is it that I'm looking for in my life? But in terms of, is everyone a leader? Yeah, I think we all have to be leaders. If you're a parent, you have to be a leader, right? There are leadership skills that you have to be able to gain to be able to be a good parent, to be a good family member, to be a good son, to be a good daughter, to be a good friend. All those things have leadership skills that are attached to them. And even being a good employee, you need some leadership skills to be able to make it work. Leadership it's not granted to us at birth. I mean, there are some people that have some traits that help them a little more than others. But leadership is something that is learned and earned. Both of those two things become important to become a better leader. We learn how to be a better leader by our mistakes, by the things that we've done wrong. I mean, I can't tell you how many things I did wrong as a parent, right? I made lots of mistakes in my life doing that, especially as a young parent. I became a parent at 17 years old, at 18 years old. And believe me, you make mistakes at 18 years old in being a parent. But you learn from that, and then you try to do better. You try to make improvements. It's earned because part of what leadership really is it's about influencing people. And when you influence people, you have to earn it. It's just not granted to you.
Yeah, I think of traits like trustworthiness and being reliable.
Yeah, absolutely.
As being important characteristics.
And I can tell you, when we get to talking about you want to be an entrepreneur, we will talk about in one of the next shows, we'll talk about the whole concept of the different types of leadership and how people can lead in different ways. But the general concept is you're trying to influence other people. And that's something that you have to go out and learn the skill sets for it, and then you have to earn that right from other people. The other thing is, and this is really important, I think, for employees, being that's who we're addressing, learning how to follow is really important. I mean, how many times have you had someone that was in a leadership position that you knew when you were listening to them? They were in the position, but they had no idea what anyone else was thinking. They had no idea of those blind spots that you talk about, that the things that they were saying and the things that they were doing were not having the impact that they thought that they were. Well, what a good follower does is they don't give up the idea of wanting to be a leader one day, but they're learning skill sets while they're there. They're listening to their colleagues complain about the boss. They're listening, they're watching the challenges that they have at being able to complete a task, to be able to make certain that the company is getting value for you as an employee. So if you become a really good follower, if you're really good at being able to be a good employee, you will gain skill sets and knowledge that you can use as you move into those higher leadership positions. So I encourage people, again, Viktor Frankel, you talked about a moment ago, his mindset was, hey, I'm going to use this as an opportunity to learn. I tell you the same thing in being an employee. Use it as an opportunity to learn about the psychology of the people that are around you. How are they thinking? How is the leader influencing them? How are they influencing you? What's more effective and less effective? What I've generally found is you cannot deal with every single employee the same way. Each one of them have different nuances that you have to think about. Where are they coming from? And until I kind of understand the person, it's more difficult for me to actually lead them to the results that I want.
Yeah. And I think about, the students that I work with too, that are placed with me from different universities. And I think I want to empower them to really practice those leadership skills. And then I want them to feel that sense of accomplishment and fulfillment when they do the work that they've invested all the time in the training and education in. And I even think back to my own training, when people believed in me and then weren't micromanaging me and not on top of me, but really trusted me, I wanted to work harder. Because not just for them, but for myself, to prove like I can do it and they believe in me and they're trusting me with this responsibility. So let me rise to this challenge and this occasion. And then I was riding my own wave.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. So that leads me to the next part of this segment is, so we developed this toolkit, which we have on optamerican.com. And these are geared for employees. And there are three main things that we really break down. One is how to be credible as an employee, how to be influential, and how to be a superstar. So I'm just going to read the first 5 that go with how to be credible.
All right.
So the first one is show up on time. The second one is do what you say. The third one is finish what you start. The fourth one is be trustworthy and tell the truth. And the fifth one is smile, be nice, say thank you, and please.
All right. So that brings me to those first 5, the credibility index. It reminds me of an employee that I had who worked for me, someone who I was very close to, still am. His name was, I won't give you his full name, but his name was Keegan. Keegan was an employee that went to work for me when he was 18 or 19 years old. He was working in the sales division, and he was upset because he said the sales managers are micromanagers and they're problematic and they're not really being fair to him, and he needed me to do something, right? Well, the problem was I was busy, and it was difficult for me to go back and try to resolve the problem between him and them. So I said, all right, why don't you just stay in my office for the next hour? And here's what I want you to do. I want you to go up to this chalkboard, and I want you to write out every single complaint they have. Now, when we get done with this, I'm going to put into the other section why they're wrong to do this. But I want you to put every complaint in there. So he gets up there and he writes out this list. This guy was crazy about what he wrote on this board. I mean, he spent literally 30 minutes writing out the details of things that they had done with him. So when he got done writing out the list, I went over and created the other column. I says, okay, well, let's walk through this. All right. I says, now here's one of the items that you have up here. It says that they're always complaining that you don't show up on time. Do you show up on time? And he goes, well, sometimes I'm not on time. Sometimes I'm late. Oh, how come? Well, because traffic is bad and there are other times. I go, okay, so on this one, we can just write, maybe they're right. And then he goes, well, yeah, so we write it. Maybe they're right. All right. So I says, all right, let's go to this next one. They complained, you said they're always complaining about how you dress. Where's their complaint coming from on how you dress? He goes, well, they don't think that I should wear shorts and that type of thing. I go, well, why do they think that? Well, they think that the customer won't think that I look professional when I meet with them. I said, well, what do you think the customer thinks? He goes, well, sometimes I'm I'm really busy and I don't have the time to actually change into a nice suit and I haven't had my suit dry cleaned. I go, okay, but you are coming to work in shorts. You're kind of saying that's kind of a problem, right? He goes, yeah. So I write down, okay, that's kind of a problem. I said, finish what you start. All right. They say that you never finish what you start. Literally everything that you just mentioned on the 5 list was one of his 45 items that he wrote up on the board. I just picked out the big ones. And by the time I got done asking that one, which was only the 3rd question, he said, I get it. I get it.
Yeah. You're turning this on me. I thought you were going to be an ally and let me complain to you, and you were going to take my side, but now you're using it against me.
I said, Keegan, this is about being credible,
yeah.
right? Just being credible. Now, here's what's interesting. Keegan learned in being an employee, he learned that tool that I had to try to help make him think about whether or not his employer was treating him right. Keegan has gone on, I think he works for one of the largest hedge funds in the entire world, and he is making multiples of 6 figures today. He's an outstanding salesperson, and he's really good at teaching other salespeople how to do their job as well. But he learned to be a follower first, right? And he was a young person who was making the simple mistakes that people make in being an employee, right? You have to show up on time. You have to finish what it is that you start. You have to be trustworthy. But that last item is the most important. You need to be nice. You need to be nice to other people and how you treat them. That really matters. It's key to finding success. So for me, those first 5 are important. I know the next set that you wanted to do was, how can you be influential?
Yeah. And, I just thought about when we were talking about the emotions that might get in the way of our success, one thought that came to mind was envy. And I've felt this before, that, I'm putting in all of this work for this employer to reap the benefits and get the rewards and to be paid well for all of the work that I'm putting in, and I'm only getting this much and I'm not getting the accolades. They're receiving it because of the work that I've put in. And from my perspective, I'm not able to see all the risks and the liabilities and all of the hard work and all the excess expenses that go into having your own
so
business.
Bad news, Emily. I'm going to give you bad news as an employer. The truth is, employees almost never understand that. All right, they almost never understand.
And I know what it's like to be on both sides
now
of that.
Now that you're an employer, you do. But I can tell you, I almost never tell my employees, do you know how much risk I've taken? Do you know how much money I've put into this company? You know the nights that I've stayed up at night wondering about whether or not the company was going to make it? Do you know how my reputation is affected by failure and the things that could possibly go wrong? Do you know how many employees come in here and ask these same exact questions? You know what I do when they come in? Okay, let's talk about what you need.
Yeah.
Right? That's the job of the employer. Now, it's great if an employee knows that and they know those risks, but it's really hard to explain to somebody something they don't know when they don't know it. It's like the whole idea of saying, well, my children are entitled. Well, yeah, because you give them everything and they don't understand what struggle means. That's not quite being entitled. They just don't understand because they've never had to experience it. Now, let's go to influential. I know that there are 5 items on the influential part. Why don't you read those to us?
Yeah, so the first one, be aware and curious. Number 2, look others in the eyes. Number 3, dress the part. Number 4, take responsibility. Number 5, never be a victim. Stay positive. I love that one. And I think what we're trying to say here is not that people aren't victimized or have a legitimacy if they are victimized, but just be aware of how it could be harmful for you to hold on to that role and that position, seeing yourself as a victim. And that becomes part of that core belief. And we'll talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I would tell you, the others are really important to being influential, which are, looking people in the eyes and making certain that you smile. All those things help you with influence. But victims are never influential. If they are influential, it's behind their back, right? They influence people who don't want to deal with the challenge that they're presenting to them. So they begin to do things that the victim doesn't really understand, which generally makes them more of a victim, more of a problem. I have seen victimhood from all sides, right? I have had people come in and say, well, I don't think, this is in the city of Phoenix, or for that matter, sometimes in different companies I've been involved with, that say, well, I don't think that I was treated right because I'm Black, or I don't think I'm treated right because I'm Hispanic, or I don't think that I've been treated right because I'm female. But I've also heard people come in and say, I think I didn't get the promotion because I'm not a minority, right? It's the ability for someone to put themselves into a victim mindset it's overwhelming, and it happens all the time. What that does is it leads to these chips that are on people's shoulders. And I promise you, you cannot gain agency. You cannot determine your own destiny when you have that mindset of being a victim.
So let me describe the victim triangle. So originally it was created and called the drama triangle, and then that was modified.
I think Karpman's triangle or something along that line, yes.
Yes, that's right. And there's a great book out. It's the empowerment model, and it's called The Power of TED.
Yeah, great book. In fact, we recommend all of our employees look at that.
Yeah, and they really do a good job with lots of examples in describing this victim triangle, which encompasses the perpetrator or persecutor, or the savior complex, which is the hero complex, and the victim. And so they talk about how different roles really can attract, and people can be codependent on others and attract people to help solidify themselves in those positions. So what does this have to do with somebody who is working as an employee? Well, I see this sometimes in my clinical practice. Somebody comes in and they're complaining about their job. They're really unhappy. There's maybe some kind of imposed restrictions on them, and they come in and they say, well, I've never done anything wrong. It's the culture of the work environment. Everyone's really gossipy. There's a power hierarchy that doesn't allow me to do anything or get anything done. No one's trustworthy. I have to do everything on my own. And but by the way, like, all the clients and everyone loves me. And I think, well, okay, how true can that inherently be? Like, what are the examples in which it doesn't exactly fit within the way that you're painting this picture? And it's hard work to do, because what you're inherently doing is looking at your ugly side. And as I was talking about before, you really have to have the ego strength in order to do that. And do this with somebody that you trust. And with me, I'm having to build that rapport and ensure this person is really feeling safe and comfortable to reveal these other added insecurities. And how are they contributing to their failures? How are they contributing to them not getting along with others or finding resolution or growing in that position? And that's because they're still stuck in that victim mentality, and everything that they see, all the problems and all the issues that they're confronted with, are coming through that victim mindset and bias that they inherently have. It's a cognitive distortion. We call these blind spots. And so what we ultimately want to do is turn the victim into the creator, really help empower them to see, what can they affect change in. It could be influencing through their relationships and changing how they're seeing things, changing their mentality and their approach, as well as people in the other two positions. But I think the victim mindset is really such a powerful one that needs to be saved. So, question for you, Paul, is you were saying people carry these chips on their shoulders, and some of that is with the mindsets. But can you go more into detail with that? What do you mean when you say chips?
Sure. So first, I think that this whole idea of a victim mindset is at epidemic proportions inside our country, and for that matter, throughout the world today. People seeing themselves as victims from a political standpoint it's really pretty much incredible to see how both the alt-right as well as the woke left are both doing that, right? They see the world in terms of the oppressed and the oppressor, and they see themselves as being oppressed by the oppressor. That of course means that they're separating people into groups. They're seeing them by the color of their skin, not by the content of their character. It just depends upon which group you're in determines who you really are. And that victim mindset gives them an inability to listen to other people. Well, the same is true inside the workforce. People constantly see that they're being victimized by other people. That's a challenge if your goal is to grow. Now, as an employer, you just have to learn to deal with that, which is part of why we recommend people read The Power of TED, because we see this becoming a constant and a constant challenge. But the issue is, if you're denied a promotion and you think that you were deserving of it, which very well may be the case. By the way, I've made thousands of decisions on promotions. And a lot of times those decisions are very tough decisions, meaning different individuals had differing strengths, and you're trying to figure out which one is actually the best person for that particular job and how is it that they would fit into it. I'm positive of this. Every person has a bias. I have biases. We all have them, right? And those biases have an effect on how we look at things. And sometimes we'll make a mistake with those biases. But the biggest mistake that you can make is believing that you're the only one without a bias, right? When you start to believe that, it's almost a guaranteed challenge. If you can understand other people's biases, you get better. And that leads me to the questions that I would ask an employer. Instead of going to the employer and playing the victim role, I would start by asking the employer if you can ask him some questions. Then give him permission to give you advice. Say, I'm really looking for some advice here. The advice is, what do you think my weakness was? What do you think my weakness was in the interview? What do you think my strength was? But the most important question that you can ask them, that you need an understanding of when you leave, is, how is it that I can give value to this company? What are the things that you think that I can do that give value to this company and that make it easier for you to get your job done? All of those things begin to change the paradigm in terms of how the employer sees you, so that in the future they're thinking about you in a different way. And maybe in the process, you gain some information, not only about their biases, but about your own bias about yourself and how you see yourself. And maybe they don't see you the same way. That may mean you have to spend either more time explaining it to them, but usually it's more of you need to spend more time showing them.
You bring up a really good point, and there was something I thought could be really relevant to talk about here, especially with the rise of the woke culture and cancel culture, and really a generational shift that we're seeing that's happening with people that are really demanding emotional safety. And I think that this is relevant to talk about, especially in terms of employee relations and what employees can do in their job to help promote themselves or seeking out opportunities. If you're seeing yourself as a victim, let's just go with a woman. I'm a woman. I could talk about being a minority woman because this is my experience. So if I'm paranoid and thinking, well, this is just an older white man's perspective, and they're not giving space for my voice, and they don't really understand my position and what it means to be a minority woman, and all the things that I had to work up against in order to be where I am today, and the world owes it to me. And in fact, now there's this opportunity. I have a place and space for me to exercise my voice, but now instead I might use my power to be able to finger point when I feel like I'm against working against an oppressor, and I feel like I'm being denied something in terms of equality because I'm seeing discrimination. Some of the challenges that I see with people with that mindset is they're seeing things outside through a scarcity lens rather than abundance lens, and it's scary for somebody in any position to have a finger pointed at them and said, well, you're sexist or you're racist. And I'm not talking about like if there's a real legitimacy to the case and there's evidence, like absolutely. I'm not saying for people to be quiet about that. And there's ways and solutions to really confront the situations, and there's very different grades of intensity. But now that people are feeling more empowered, it's so incredible to know how to yield and use that power for good. And I think that instead of really exercising that victim mentality and allowing that paranoia to drive those conversations, it's important to really think about, how do I want to feel about myself at the end of the day? How do I maintain self-respect here? How do I feel empowered in this new position? How do I confront these challenges? Or how do I confront this person that I see as a persecutor? Or how do I confront this person that I see has an inherent bias, who I feel is discriminating me? And what's the best solution? And how am I seeing the solution? And I think there's a lot of challenges that we're seeing in day to day, and maybe these just sound like kind of blanket statements and generalizations. But I think that there's going to be some truth there, and we're going to see that evolve over time. So going back to you, Paul, you were saying, well, what about people who have this chip on their shoulder, and they may have a right to experience that chip? Maybe they were denied a promotion because of whatever they're telling themselves, based on their gender, or based on their race, or based on their qualifications. What would you say to them? How would you talk to them if they were feeling really resentful, that they felt like they were denied this promotion that they felt that they earned?
Well, that's a tough question. And it's a tough question because there are all types of rules and laws and liabilities with talking incorrectly to an employee. What I can do is help give people perspective here today. Here's the first thing I can tell you. There isn't a single group out there that I haven't had make a complaint to me, especially during my time as mayor, right? And when I say not a group, I mean African-American, Black, women, people of sexual orientation, white males. I've heard complaints from all of them, all right? And all of them believing that they're a victim. And generally what you do as an employer, especially, is you listen, right? But if I were trying to give advice to the employee, I would start with this. My dad used to say this to me. It's your fault. And I would get so mad at him. I'd go, it's my fault. How can this be my fault? And he'd say, because if it's not your fault, you can't fix it.
Yes.
Take ownership
back to
of
having
this,
the power.
right? Take over.
Yes.
Take the power, right? The first thing I would say to you is take over the power of saying, wait a minute, this didn't happen because of them. This happened because of me. I need to do something better. Meaning, if you think you're being discriminated against because you're a white male and people are picking minorities, maybe you got to figure out, what can you do to make that better, right? Maybe one of the things that you could do is do a better job. Maybe another thing you could do is make certain you communicate better. Maybe you change jobs and go to some place where you're going to be more valued. The same is true with other minorities, right? Now, again, that's not the answer I'd give as an employer, right? Because as an employer, that can cause you a lot of grief. But today we're trying to help people who are employees empower themselves. And so I'd start with that. Now, I would then tell you, here are, we have the 5 keys to becoming a superstar. So I'm going to start by talking about those. I'm going to hit the first 2. The first one is learn to listen. And that is really a hard thing to do. And to listen, you have to ask questions. And you cannot ask a question that's a loaded question. The employer will get it. If you're trying to ask them a question that's going to trap them and put them into a position where they're going to have higher liability, they're not going to really talk to you, all right? Neither will your other fellow employees. You have to ask questions that maybe they really will answer and that really will give you valuable input. The second thing I would tell you is, what I would ask an employer is, know the vision. Look, people will say to me all the time, we have a healthcare business. And so our employees, if I ask them, I'll say, hey, what's the vision of the company? I can't tell you how many employees will say, oh, well, we're in the healthcare business, right? Here's the truth to that, the vision. That's not the truth. We're in the business of helping people relieve the stress related to their healthcare decisions so they can get on to the things that they love. That's really what we do, right? That's what the customer cares about. They're stressed about this. They're stressed about the decisions and the challenges that they're facing. And our mission is to try to relieve that stress so they can go on and do the things that they really want to do. For my employees, we have a great mission that is written out and stated, and we have what we call a moonshot, where we talk about what is it that we'd like to get to one day. But probably the single most important thing that you can do in any company is make certain that the person that you're working for and the company that you're working for, that you really understand what's the vision of this company. What are we even trying to get to in the first place?
Yes, that's great. And then the third one is really knowing your value. And we all have different talents, we all have different strengths, and we're all confronted with different limitations. Be honest about what those limitations are. And if you're unsure or unclear of those, I would do a survey. I suggest this to my clients all the time. Hey, survey people that you trust, or maybe take a randomized sample of people in your work environment and just ask them some really basic questions. Hey, honestly, what do you think are my strengths and my weaknesses? Or ask your supervisors, what can I grow on? Or what do you really rely or depend on me upon and see as my talent and something that I could really grow and expand on?
Now, on all of these, a good employer, a great employer, would be helping employees know the answers to these questions. We're giving these to the employees and saying, reverse this on your employer. You start by trying to make certain that you know the vision. You make certain that you've listened to what it is that's important. And on that one, adding value, here's the best example I can give. You say, well, my job is I'm a receptionist. Oh, what does that mean? Well, my job is to make certain that I get people booked in and that I tell the doctor that they're here so that we can get the meeting set up. All right. Well, the answer is we're trying to relieve the stress that people have in their healthcare decisions. We're trying to relieve the stress that they confront. You were speaking earlier about that visit that you had with your primary care doctor for our daughter.
It was not client-centric.
Right?
It was not patient-centric.
But here's how a receptionist can play a role. Start with this. When somebody walks through the door, look them in the eyes.
Yeah, greet them.
Smile, right?
Welcome
and say,
them.
welcome, who are you here to see? And then walk them through the process. Show them what they need to do. When you know that somebody's been sitting in the lobby for 10 or 15 minutes, which is longer than they should have been sitting there, go out and offer them a drink. Say, I'm really sorry that this is happening. The doctor is going to get right after this, but can I get you something to drink or to eat? Or make an offer to them. Make them know that you care about them. A receptionist can play an incredible role. In fact, maybe one of the most important roles in a company at establishing the brand of who are we, because it's the first person that they see. But if your answer is, well, they're just a receptionist, it doesn't matter as the employer, shame on you. And if you're the employee and you say, well, I'm just a receptionist, you don't understand your potential to affect and add value to that company. Now, the next one is know and deliver on your timelines. All right. Now, the receptionist probably doesn't have timelines other than showing up on time. But when you have a project that you're working on, it's really important to know, hey, what are the timelines of this project? What is it that this project is supposed to look like in the end? What's expected of me? And when am I supposed to deliver that? Again, a good boss would tell you those things. Sometimes, as an employee, you'll go ask those questions, and the boss can't tell you, right? Hopefully you spur them into action, meaning they haven't thought about really the process that has to take place for it to work. But those timelines are essential. And if you as an employee are the one that's asking about it, you're going to be seen as a superstar. Never in a meeting, even the 10-minute meeting that you have with your employer or your boss, that you don't ask this question. When do you need that?
Yes.
When is it expected?
Absolutely.
Right? And write that date down.
Yes. Yeah, those are very important, and just back to, customer service relations, sometimes some little tricks or things that I play in my own mind is, how would my mother want to be treated? And that's how I treat that person.
Yeah, and our Dr. Johnston, I love her line. She says, how would I want to treat my mom?
Yes.
All right. So she tries to treat people in that exact same way. So the last one is to become a superstar. It's expand your education, right? Your education is going to play a keen role in you being able to get promotions and to be able to understand. And there are lots of ways to get an education. Now, one way is go take classes. But I am stunned by the amount of things that you can learn online from professors who are the best in class.
Yeah, there's so much that's available and accessible.
And you can listen to podcasts. You can listen to free classes that people are giving. You can take seminars, or you can actually go back and go to school. The other thing you can do, and I highly encourage this to people, get a mentor. Get several mentors, right? There's an old saying I think was biblical. It was the best kingdom has 1,000 advisors. Get a group of people that are advising you that you can talk to, that help you think through those biases that you have. And by the way, that will help on the victim triangle a lot, unless you get somebody who's advising you that they just simply think that the only thing that they need to do is to make certain that emotionally your needs are taken care of. Certainly your emotional needs to be taken care of. I don't want to diminish that. But sometimes you need somebody that says, well, what can you do? How are we going to fix this?
Yeah, and still having the confidence to really weigh those options and weigh the advice that you're getting, because ultimately no one knows you better than yourself. And so once you do get that input and information from people outside of you, it's important for you to still evaluate, well, what are the pros and cons of all of those decisions and what's going to work best for me? Nobody knows my schedule. Nobody knows, like, hey, Friday is an important day because that's the day that I have with my child, and I want to preserve that day as sacred. So I'd rather work late during nights than really sacrifice some extra days to go in and do some in-person classes. So have the confidence in yourself to be able to ultimately make those decisions for yourself, but get a nice diverse range of opinions, people who don't think like you. So you're not just surrounding yourself with people who are going to tell you what you want to hear, but really hear this diverse range of opinions. So what would you say to an employer whose employees are saying it's important for us to have our emotional needs met? What are your thoughts? What advice would you give?
Again, I might answer that a little differently if I had an employee sitting here in front of me. If I were giving advice to employees, it would be this. It sounds really close to that whole victim triangle that we were just talking about, right? No, I wouldn't go tell your employer you need your emotional needs met. But what I might do is this: go talk to my employer about what their emotional needs are. Right? Meaning I would go to them and say, gosh, how do you deal with all the problems that you have? How do you manage the differences that might exist between employees? What's the hardest thing that you do in your job? What is it that you think that needs to happen for somebody to really be able to make an improvement? You know, my read of the employer's role is they actually should be walking around and asking people, hey, what can I do to help you better get your job done? And if your answer is, man, I need daycare, right? Well, then you might talk to them about that, right? You might say, look, I'm really struggling with this issue and I'm not quite sure how to fix it. You know, and if that's an emotional need, that's fine. But just simply talking to the employer about the emotional need, I would be cautious about it because, again, I think it just borders right on that line of victimhood. That doesn't mean your emotional needs shouldn't be met. Certainly they should be. I'm just not quite sure that it's your employer that you should be talking to about trying to meet them.
So, Paul, what do you think about the future of the job market?
Oh, I think that this generation is going to be gifted with one of the best job markets over the next 20 to 25 years that maybe has happened in American history. Lots of things are taking place that are creating huge changes in our marketplace. You know, the first one is that I think globalization is coming to an end. Now, there are some challenges with that, and there are some problems. One of them is going to be prices are probably going to get higher. But, you know, we have a whole group of people today, the millennials, that are entering into the job market today. They're starting to earn money. They're buying cars, they're buying houses, they're starting to buy products. That's creating a higher demand, and we're going to have a challenge keeping up with supply. At the exact same time, the Russians now are going to be putting less commodities into the marketplace, and I think you're going to see the Chinese putting less labor into the marketplace. The result of that is going to be you're going to see a lot of onshoring going on with American corporations bringing jobs back home, and clearly that's going to create a problem with finding labor, finding employees. That's good news for today's workforce. I think this is going to be one of the best workforce or one of the best eras for finding a job, maybe in my lifetime. Now, that doesn't mean there won't be recessions. That doesn't mean there won't be downturns. And the feds are working very hard in the short term to try to get a handle on inflation. And part of how they're trying to do that is slow the economy. The way they slow the economy is reduce the amount of jobs that are out there. But that will be a short-term problem, not a long-term one.
And what's your thought on the disparities of income between employers and employees?
You know, I get everybody likes to talk about the 1%. I find this to be interesting. Vladimir Putin and Xi put it this way. They say that the problem is that there's a golden billion, meaning there are a billion people out of the 8 billion people on the planet who control most of the wealth. Well, here's what I would say to most Americans. If you're earning minimum wage, you're in that golden billion. Right? That's who they're talking about. They're talking about all of us. If you're living in this country, even at minimum wage, your quality of life is higher than most people around the world. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't a disparity that exists. But I can tell you, if you really look at the numbers, if you get done taking if you look at the current stats, there's about a 14% difference between those people at the very bottom and those people at the top. Well, then you have to add transfer payments back in, meaning the IRS today, which it wasn't doing 50 years ago, is giving direct transfer payments back to the lower income workers. There are benefits that are given by employers that weren't given before, including health care benefits. But then the big one is the amount of tax that are being paid by the upper income group. Now, don't look at the percentage, look at the total. It's one of the highest dollar amounts ever. The result of that is really the income disparities at about 4 to 5%. That makes it arguably one of the lowest in 50 years. Now, you won't hear that because today, politically, that's not the thing to say, and defending it becomes very difficult. I've been around the world. I've seen where disparities were massive. There's no doubt that we have to constantly work at trying to make certain that we're bringing people from the bottom up. But the question that people might ask is this: am I better off to bring people at the top down to the lowest end if it gets rid of the inequality, or to raise everybody up, but maybe the inequality might actually grow? You know, I went to Cuba and with a group of friends of mine, and we looked at the economy, and it was almost like an Ayn Rand dystopian novel.
Yeah, I've
right?
been to Cuba. I know exactly what you're talking about.
The average person made $186. Not the average person. Everybody made $186 per month. So if you were a doctor or if you were a sanitation worker, you were making the exact same amount. There was no incentive to work harder. There was no incentive to go to school. Now, interestingly enough, there were doctors. I met doctors there who were actually engaged in prostitution. And I asked them, I said, I don't understand this. Why would you be doing that if you have a doctorate degree? They had shown us their cards and everything else. And the answer was because their view was that was the only place where they could make extra money. If you remove the incentives for people to make extra money, ambitious people have to find another way. My answer is...
Or they just become complicit, and then it kills their human
That's
spirit
right.
and their drive and their ambition, which is also what I witnessed, unfortunately.
Look, this system, like it or not, has done more to pull people out of poverty, to reduce illiteracy, to reduce child immortality. What we've been able to accomplish in this time and this place, in this country today, is unprecedented.
Yeah.
It's just unprecedented. That doesn't mean there aren't problems, all right? Usually the problem isn't the problem of the disparity, but what have I lost? When workers in the East Coast, the eastern portion of our country, lost jobs during the globalization period, that had an effect on them. Even though many of them were still making good money, some of them weren't. The fact that they had a loss, that the factory had been shut down, that created challenges. Again, good news, those factories are going to be opening back up. Different types of factories, different types of jobs. What I would tell people is it is really key to be prepared to retrain yourself, because the rules are changing, the job market's changing, and there's no president. A president could stop those jobs from coming here, but they really can't stop the loss of jobs. You know, when I remember there was a study done that talked about when we put on a tariff on steel, we saved jobs that were like 6,000 jobs at $25,000, $25,000 per job. But we cost ourselves literally 200,000 jobs of people that were making 80,000 a year that were making airplanes. Right? It becomes
Got to have that long-term vision.
And again, this is not a perfect place. There are all types of challenges. We're going to have to continue to work on public policy. But if you ask me, you couldn't ask to have been born in a better place and time than right here and right now.
So millennials are taking a lot of heat. What is your thought on millennials and their role in this changing job market?
Well, First, Emily, I don't like seeing people in terms of groups, not even millennials. I like seeing people in terms of individuals. To me, one of the great things that we have in our country is that we were based from the very beginning on the idea of individuals. And so trying to categorize millennials as being lesser than or greater than, that in itself is a bit bothersome to me. Now, in saying that, I do think that this generation, if you looked at general traits, have some traits that are pretty amazing. They're great traits. One of them is they're more communal. All right, they tend to care more about the group. They're more empathetic. They're definitely more empathetic than my generation was, right? Empathy is a big, big issue. And that gives them the potential for greatness. I think there's some generalizations that I would give. And again, they're generalizations that are some of their weaknesses, right? One of the weaknesses is the need for safety. There's lots of talks about this. There's a book called The Coddling of the American Mind. But the idea that parents of the generation before them wanted to make certain they were safe. And they watched all these things about crime on television, about how bad crime was. The truth is, crime is at an all-time low. But you're not going to believe that if you're watching the nightly news. But it is, right? It's also hard to believe when you have like these neighborhood apps that are telling you about everything that happens on every corner. Those things have been happening for a while. It's just we didn't know about them as much, and we weren't informed about them as much, and we didn't have the news media pushing them. This is one of the safest times to raise a child inside of our country. That's just a reality. Now, obviously, that changes on certain locations, but in general, that's true. However, the information that we're getting have made many of those millennials' parents more afraid, and so they were working harder to protect them, to keep them from harm. That actually rises, as you and I have talked about in other podcasts, the level of anxiety and stress for people. They become more concerned about being safe. Here's what I can absolutely tell you. Unless you're willing to face resistance, you cannot gain resilience, right? You have to challenge yourself. The challenge that we're seeing today in our body politic is no one wants to listen to other people. The right wing doesn't want to listen to the left wing. The left wing doesn't want to listen to the right. And when you get to the alt-right and the woke left, they have no interest whatsoever in hearing the other side. Not just the woke left not only doesn't want to hear the alt-right, they really don't even want to listen to the liberals, right? Because if it doesn't fall within their orthodoxy, they're challenged by it. They don't know how to deal with that conflict. Here's how you learn how to deal with conflict. Listen to people that you don't agree with. That doesn't mean that you have to agree with them. Doesn't mean you have to concede that they're right. It just means that you gain strength from being able to do it. And who knows, maybe along the way, they hear some things from you that changes their mind a little, and you hear things from them that change their mind. To me, millennials, that communal aspects have huge, huge advantages. If they combine that with improving their strength and becoming more resilient, I think this is going to be the greatest generation America's ever seen.
Well, thank you, Paul. These are such great insights, and I really hope that people listening and different employees can pull from this what will help them to become influential, to regain their power, to look out for cognitive biases that they may have that might be inhibiting their growth, and seeing where they can be successful and promote themselves.
Thank you, Emily. It's a good show. Thanks for joining the Optimistic American Show. Now, help us grow by subscribing to our channel. If you enjoyed the episode, please leave a like and a comment. There is so much more that we have planned. We can't wait for you to embark upon this journey with us.